As much as I can remember, every year without fail, we've had a huge blizzard that just welcomes in March, and this year was no exception. That was just a lot of snow that I had to shovel out of my driveway. Everybody, welcome back to another video. I am back. I was absent for the last week or so of February because I got sick. I might even sound a bit stuffed up still, although personally I think I sound congested in most of my videos anyway, and my ears are still kind of in that plugging, unplugging phase of being sick. So I still wanted to film a video, so we're going to make the best of it. I feel like the whole wave and trend has come and gone, but I am here with my March wrap-up and my March TBR. I have a TBR video, so you guys are going to be getting a double feature today. Thanks to audiobooks, which I've mentioned a few times now, and I will probably be doing a whole video on in the future. But since my obsession with audiobooks has been doing so well, I managed to read 10 books this month, and I'm pretty happy with that. At least I think it's 10. From what I counted, it was 10. We'll see what I actually end up with. The first book I read was a reread, and that was The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. I reread this. Well, I didn't actually read this edition. I listened to the audiobook, but kind of tracked my progress in this edition. The Book Thief, I kept it at a 5-star rating because it was still a really well done story with the characters and the narration of it and the way it was told. However, I noticed, I think more so this time around, like I knew there was quite a bit of swearing in it. And I think I noticed with it having been read to me that there's a lot of swearing in this book. So there's a lot of swearing, as I've mentioned, so if you're not big on that, in German and English, and I definitely picked up on what the German swear words were. But also what kind of bothered me was the terms of endearment, or the names that just the loved ones give each other, are actually really derogatory and really inappropriate. And I was told by my mother that that's probably not a word you want to call anybody, so don't use the S-word German word that they use in this book, that especially that Liesel's mother or foster mother calls her. Don't use that as a term of endearment. It's not very nice. But there was just a lot of it in this book, and I was just taken aback again by how much swearing it was. But other than that, I really enjoyed the storyline, the characters, their narration, and how unique the narration was, and just the poignancy of this story. Poignancy, is that the word? But the heartfeltness of this story. And if that's not a word, we're going to make it a word. The next book I read was another reread, and this is also part of our Coffee Chapters and Christian YA book club pick. And I know you guys, we did promise you some live shows. There's a lot of stuff going on Melanie's end, so we're just going to be really patient with her and all the things that her and her family are dealing with right now. But when we get back on track with that, we will schedule some live shows for you guys. I am trying to keep up to date in the Goodreads chats and the discussion groups with you guys, so I can kind of stay on top of that with you. But this is part of our Hagenheim read-along. This was our February book, so Ferris Beauty February is what I called it on Instagram. And I've been rereading these through audiobooks, as you know, most of these books are, and I've really enjoyed the narration of these. I like the way the different characters are portrayed through the voice changes and just the way the story is told. It's really engaging, and I like to pick up a lot of things that I may have forgotten since my first read through. I think this one was only a 4-star rating for me. These aren't my favorite characters. This isn't my favorite book in the series. I was actually kind of annoyed with Gabe most of the time and kind of disappointed in him. Just the way some of the situations worked. This isn't my favorite of the series, but it was still really good. I mean, it's still a 4-star rating for me. After that, I picked up North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, and no, this is not the Civil War epic. Every time I tell somebody, oh, I'm reading North and South, or I'm watching the North and South miniseries, people think it's the one with the Civil War. I don't even know what that one's about. I'm talking about like the miniseries with Richard Armitage from the PBS or BBC, and I'm talking about Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South. Is the one I'm talking about. I loved the miniseries with Richard Armitage, so I wanted to pick up the book. And after reading now both the book and watching the miniseries did an excellent job at portraying a lot of the events in the book. It stayed very close to most of the events in the book. It did change a few things, but quite honestly, the book was a lot more depressing than the miniseries was. I'm kind of glad they changed a few things just so Margaret doesn't have the most depressing existence on the planet, and they did change that up a bit in the miniseries and made it a little bit more lighthearted, but still kept a lot of the other major elements to it. I did listen to this through audiobook through Audible. Audible has fantastic editions of classics. I would use Audible mostly for classics because they have really well done productions of them. And this was another Audible exclusive, and it was Juliet Stevens. I'm not too sure if she's a celebrity or not. Most of these narrators are celebrities. If I'm missing somebody who I should know, it was Juliet Stevens who was the narrator, and she did a marvelous job of it. I loved the way the story was told, and it really kept my attention, and I thoroughly enjoyed the story, and I would definitely reread this. So far, it is one of my favorite classics. The next book was also an audiobook from Audible with the Audible exclusive or productions with a celebrity narrator who is Nick Offerman for The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. I did not like this book. I grew up with the premise of these stories through Tom and Hook, the Disney movie, and the Huckleberry Finn movie with Elijah Wood, as well as some of the children's classics editions that I read growing up, and I did not like this book. I liked Nick Offerman's narration of it, but I am not a fan of Mark Twain's books. In fact, I decided to not even pick up Huckleberry Finn. I know it was written for its time, but I didn't like the racism for both people of color and Native American people. And like, just talking about Injun Joe, who's one of the characters, they called him like a dirty half-breed half the time. And being Métis, like technically that's what he would have been, although I don't think in the United States they consider the Métis people a people group. But I was just so put off by it, and the way it was talked about, and then how Injun Joe was treated and made be the villain because he was the Indian or the half-breed or whatever, and he was just an evil person and people just mistreated him because he was Native, and so then he became the bad guy. And I was just like, all of that bothered me so much. And then I don't know how old Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn and the group of boys are supposed to be, but they are stupid. And I have no idea what age they're supposed to be to kind of correct some of the things or to, make some of the things seem less stupid. Like, some of the conversations and things in here just could have been cut. For all I care. Like this one conversation, Tom meets this boy on the street. I have no idea who this boy is. I don't know if he's in the book later on, or if he's a prominent character, or if Tom even really knows him. They just start yelling at each other about like, oh, I'm gonna beat you up. Oh, why don't you come over here and do that? Don't think I won't. And they just do this for the next 2 pages of threatening to beat each other up, and then nobody does anything to beat each other up, and all they did was meet in the street. Like, I just did not like this book, and I made it through because it was a decently done audiobook. I really liked Rick Offerman's narration of it. That's about it. I didn't like the story. I gave it 2 stars. I mean, like, creativity of it, and I guess it is a classic, but just don't. Moving on to a book I enjoyed a lot more, and that was Salt of the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. This was a buddy read that I read along with my friend Felicia from Little Prairie Library. We both destroyed ourselves and consoled ourselves, or consoled each other after we read this. It was a World War II heartbreaking book again, and I don't know why I read 2 World War II books back to back, essentially, this month, but I decided I wanted to put myself through that. This follows a group of people during the Polish evacuation, or the evacuation of like Poland and Prussia, when the Russians are moving into Germany and into those areas. And this was one of the biggest ocean or shipwreck events, and it had cost more lives than the Titanic itself. But do we talk about it? No. We probably talk about the Titanic more than we talk about these ships going down. And there are so many lives lost in this massive evacuation. Yeah, I'm not too sure if there was like a name for this massive sea wreck or anything, but it was just a terrible loss of life and terrible things that happen to people. And you follow a group, you follow a nurse, you follow a German, you follow a Polish girl, I think she was Polish, and you just follow these group of people as they evacuate. You really, your heart bleeds for these people, you really get attached to these people, and a lot of just terrible things happen which would have happened to these people at the time. So it's very heart-wrenching. It's very hard to read in some areas. There was one character who was raped in this book, and they do flashback to it, but they don't give a whole lot of detail, and they don't bring it, you know, drive it on as like a form of the, like, to keep the book going or anything. It's not a plot device. It's just, this is what happened to this girl, and this is her story. And I thought it was really well done, but I just want to give people a content heads up for a lot of the things that went on in this book, and just in general for most of my World War II books that I read, there's a lot of heartbreaking stuff that happens in here. There's also one character that drove me mad, but it was really fascinating to see his perspective during all of this, even though he was probably the worst character possible in this book. Overall, I gave it a 4-star rating. It wasn't my favorite book, but it was still a very, very well done book, and it is one that I would recommend if you're into the World War II genre. I then listened to The Forgetting by Shannon Cameron on audiobook through my library. This was one that I had started to read, but then I had DNF'd because it was boring. But I decided, because, oh, it's on audiobook, I'll give it a go again, and then I remembered I had started it on audiobook, and I still DNF'd it. I wrote here that I gave it a 2-star, but I think I wanted to give it a 1-star, and I probably would have given it 0 stars because it was so boring and nothing happened. And the audiobook, the narrator was so slow, just her regular reading speed, that if I didn't speed her up to 1.75 speed, I would have never gotten through this book. And even at 1.75, she was actually at a normal reading speed for me, and that was just nuts. That did not help the boringness of this book. Basically, this is set in a sort of a dystopian kind of setting, although there's a lot more. It's like a sci-fi telling, so there's a lot more part of that mystery that you find on later in the book. And every 12 years, I think, everybody forgets everything. You forget who you are, you forget your family, you forget everything, and it's called The Forgetting. So they carry around these notebooks and they write everything down about their life, about the people, but then a lot of chaos ensues at the end, and so a lot of people like to change what their life actually is. And so it just is an overall chaotic dystopian book. So you're following this young girl who actually doesn't forget and remembers some events from her first forgetting and is building up for the next forgetting, and then she meets this young guy and blah blah blah. I'm not really good at describing it. I just know I didn't like it. It was weird, it was boring, there was no connection to the characters. They threw in at the last second some themes or content in there that I don't read typically because of some of my personal beliefs and convictions, and so I wasn't really impressed with it. And it got really, really violent at the end and kind of bloody, and I was not impressed. They had this fake word, Zopa, which it was supposed to be like the swear or the calling somebody a name, and it just sounded stupid. Like, just say, oh, he is such a Zopa. What is that supposed to mean? So, needless to say, I know this isn't giving you guys much of anything at all. I don't remember a lot of it because it was really boring. So, yeah. I should have left it at a DNF, but I was like, oh, I'll give it another go. No. No. It was really boring. I then picked up the book, The Forgotten Book by Mitchell Glaser, and I hope I'm saying that right because I was kind of practicing listening to the narrator on the audiobook to make sure I got this one right. And again, I did this one through audiobook through a different program, which I'm going to talk about in my audiobook video that I'm planning on doing in the future, so stay tuned for that. This book is about Emma, who is the daughter of the headmaster from a prestigious boarding school. She is entering, I think, her 2nd or 3rd year of this boarding school. I'm not too sure how the grades and classes worked because it was very European and I am North American, and even the US has different grade systems than we do in Canada slightly, so I didn't know how it worked. But it was set in a boarding school, and after she and her friends start to remodel this old unused library in the East Wing or West Wing, one of the wings that is no longer used, they end up finding this mysterious book, which has this kind of hidden magic to it. And it kind of takes off on this whirlwind mystery adventure that I loved. So let me just tell you a few things about myself here with my reading taste. I love boarding school books. Anything set in a boarding school, I am all about that, especially if they're set in like massive old European castles or European boarding schools, you know, those type of things. I am a sucker for those. So I very much enjoyed this book. The other thing I really liked about it was that it was very subtly or very surprisingly a Pride and Prejudice retelling, which I adored. It was so well done and it caught me off guard. It took me until I think a few chapters in and I'm like, wait a second, is this a Pride and Prejudice retelling? And it was, with a very fantastical element. Boarding school mystery meets Pride and Prejudice retelling. You have The Forgotten Book, which I loved. The premise of this was well done. Now, I don't know if it was the translation or just there's a few plot holes or just kind of gaps in the story that kind of jumped from here to here. And then especially the ending, there's a lot of questions left unanswered. It's just like, and this wraps up here and we're done. And you're like, okay, but what about those other situations? Now, this book wrapped up better than her other book I read, The Book Jumper, which I'll talk about later. But I really like the way this one was wrapped up a little bit, excluding those kind of questions I had. The story premise and the execution of it was really well done. The writing was fantastical and mysterious and it had a lot of those fun elements I really like about a good fantasy. You even get to kind of explore this kind of different world and this history of this building and this school. I eat those things up. And then you throw in this great little retelling and it was just the cherry on top. I really enjoyed this book. A few content heads up. One character does get a little bit drunk. She hadn't eaten all day. She was kind of nervous because the guy she has a crush on asked her to go to the pub. I don't know what the drinking age limits and stuff are in Europe. I know they're different than they are in Canada, obviously, because I don't think she was 18. But she went and she had 2 pints on an empty stomach and got a little drunk. She wasn't like completely hammered or anything, and nothing happens to her except she just starts talking and spilling secrets and stuff. So that happens. There's one instant where a guy is seen escaping a girl's room from the girl's dormitory, but what actually went on or anything, it was all insinuated or implied. Nothing actually happened or was discussed, or even if anything was going on. Maybe he was just hanging out in her room. Who knows? But anyway, so there's a couple instances there, but like I said, they don't go into too much detail about anything. The other thing I give a heads up on is some of the swearing. It is very mild swearing. It's got some British slang words that are considered swears or just some more cruder language. They definitely say the S word and the D word a lot, but especially the S word. But it's just very mild swearing, but there's actually quite a bit of it toward the middle end of it where just a lot more frustration started to happen. So there's some interesting moments in this book for sure. Overall, I give it a 4-star rating. Like I said, there's a couple like plot holes and questions left in some situations, and then some of the swearing in the content and just some of the overall things, but I still really enjoyed this book and loved the fact that I had a boarding school mystery meets a Pride and Prejudice retelling that I was all about. The next 2 books were a reread for me and also audiobook reads, and those were The Chamber of Secrets and The Prisoner of Azkaban, the Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling. So I wanted to do a Harry Potter reread, even though I just read them for the first time last year. I already wanted to reread them. I loved The Chamber of Secrets still. It's one of my favorite books, but my all-time favorite book is The Prisoner of Azkaban. I really enjoyed this, but I'm enjoying just the characters again. I loved in The Chamber of Secrets, there's a moment where they didn't show it in the movie, but Mr. Weasley totally tackles Mr. Malfoy, and you just hear Fred and George cheering, "Yeah, get him, Dad!" And I just like burst out laughing just at the antics of the characters and the way they were portrayed and told through the audiobook, and just getting to be with these amazing characters again. So I really enjoyed them, and The Prisoner of Azkaban, as to this point, is still my favorite book. Last but not least, to wrap up the month, I finished off the Wires and Nerves series by Mr. Meyer. This is volume 2, Gone Rogue. I enjoyed this. I think I only gave it a 4-star or 3-star rating. It wasn't amazing to me. It was nice to be with these characters again, but it didn't wow me. There was a bit of a difference with the art style. I think April Sarah had been talking about that on her channel, so I picked up on that when I was reading this one. I think I liked the art style a little bit more in this one, but overall, like I said, it wasn't my favorite. It wasn't amazing. It was still a really enjoyable read. It was a very clean read, and I liked how a lot of things got wrapped up and then even connected into the novellas and Stars Above. This is probably one of my longest filmed wrap-ups because I already had to empty my SD card. Go me. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them, or maybe what your favorite book was for February and what you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions about any of the content or any of the books I've mentioned here, as always, feel free to leave those down below. I'll answer them as best as I can. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!